The Vorthak warship Silverscale hung in the void like a blade poised to strike, its brutalist angles catching the dim light of a dying star. Commander Vorgul stood motionless on the observation deck, his armored exoskeleton reflecting the silver-purple glow of the ship's energy cores. His 4 eyes, 2 primary, 2 secondary, scanned the tactical display before him, the holographic projections painting his dark steel face in flickering violet. The situation was dire. For 3 cycles, the Vorthak Dominion had been hemorrhaging territory to the Kethari Swarm, an insectoid scourge that consumed worlds like fire through dry grass. Their fleets, once vast and unassailable, now lay in ruins, their fortress worlds burned. And now, the last bastion of their civilization, the cradle, world of Vorthak's prime, stood on the brink. Vorgul's mandibles twitched in frustration. He had fought in 100 battles, commanded fleets that had shattered enemy armadas, yet now he was reduced to this, a desperate gamble, a plea for salvation from a species his people had long dismissed as primitive. "Status?" he growled, his voice a low, resonant hum. At the tactical console, Gromnock, the ship's chief scientist, adjusted his neural interface, tendrils of silver-purple energy flickering around his cranial implants. "The beacon is active, Commander. The signal has been sent." Vorgul exhaled through his secondary vents. The beacon was an ancient thing, a relic from a forgotten era when the Vorthak had still believed in mercy. Decades ago, during a routine scouting mission, they had intercepted a crippled human vessel, a tiny fragile thing, barely spaceworthy. Its crew had been dying, suffocating in the cold void, and the Vorthak, in a rare moment of compassion, had saved them. Just one. A single human life, plucked from the abyss. They had asked for nothing in return. Now, they were asking for everything. Gromnock's voice was hesitant. "Commander, do you truly believe they will answer?" Vorgul's primary eyes narrowed. The humans were an enigma. Violent. Yes. Unpredictable, certainly. But they were also persistent. They had clawed their way from their mudball of a homeworld to the stars in mere centuries, defying every expectation. And they remembered debts. "We shall see," he rumbled. Then the sensors screamed, a distortion in the void, a ripple in space-time. No, not a ship, a monster. It tore into reality with a thunderclap of displaced energy, its silhouette blotting out the stars. The sheer scale of it made Vorgul's exoskeleton lock in primal instinct. This was no human vessel from the old records, no fragile tin can held together with hope and desperation. This was a fortress of war. Its hull was layered in blackened alloy, etched with scars from battles. Vorgul could scarcely imagine its prow bristled with weapon emplacements, railgun batteries the size of city blocks, plasma lances humming with restrained fury, and at its heart, a reactor core pulsed with an energy signature that made the Vorthak's own power system seem like candle flames before a star. Gromnock's voice was a whisper. "By the void." A transmission crackled across the comms. No preamble, no hesitation. Just a voice. Human, female, calm as a blade before the strike. "Vorthak vessel Silverscale. This is Commander Jennifer Mitchell of the Terran Dreadnought Remembrance. We received your call." Vorgul's secondary eyes dilated. They had come, and as the Remembrance powered its weapons, bathing the void in silver-purple fire, he realized something with dawning, terrible clarity. The humans had not come to repay a debt. They had come to settle it. The Remembrance hung in the void, like a blade unsheathed. Vorgul's claws flexed against the command console, his chitinous plates shifting in unease. The human warship was not merely a vessel. It was a relic of war, its hull pitted with the scars of 1,000 battles, its armor layered in alloys the Vorthak scanners struggled to classify. The energy readings alone made his neural tendrils flare in alarm. That reactor core burned hotter than any Vorthak warship could sustain without melting its own circuits. Gromnok's secondary hands trembled as he parsed the data. Their power signature, it's not just fusion. Therese, something else woven into it, something old. Vorgul didn't need the scientist to tell him that. The humans had always been reckless with their technology, stitching together advancements with no regard for stability or tradition. But this was something else entirely. A flicker on the tactical display. The Remembrance's weapons were live, not merely charged. Thrumming railgun capacitors hummed at the edge of discharge. Plasma coils cycling with a rhythmic pulse that matched the warship's reactor like a heartbeat. And then there were the secondary systems. Those were the ones that made Vorgul's blood run cold. "Commander," Gromnok rasped, his voice brittle. "Their point, defense grid, it's not just intercepting, it's tracking us." Vorgul's mandibles tightened. Of course it was. The humans had never been content with mere shields. Their defenses were as much a weapon as their guns. A new signal cut through the comms. Not the human commander this time, but another voice, male, rougher. "Vorthak vessel, this is Captain Paul Felger of the Remembrance Marine Detachment. We're detecting boarding signatures on your lower decks. You got hostiles?" Vorgul's spine stiffened. Somehow, the humans had already scanned his ship, parsed its layout, identified the breach points where the enemy had forced their way in. The Silver Scale was dying, its corridors choked with the enemy, its crew fighting a losing battle deck by deck. And yet, the humans had seen it in seconds. Gromnok's voice was a whisper. "They're not just here to fight, they're here to hunt." Vorgul exhaled slowly, his primary eyes locking onto the warship's prow. The debt had been called, and the humans had answered. Not with mercy, but with fire. The Silver Scale shuddered again, its failing gravity system sending a sickening lurch through the command deck. Vorgul's claws dug into the railing, his secondary eyes flicking across the tactical display. The enemy was everywhere, swarming through the lower decks like molten metal through cracks in armor. His crew fought, but they were being pushed back, corridor by corridor, their defensive lines collapsing under the relentless tide. And then there was the human ship, the Remembrance. It hung in the void like a blade unsheathed, its angular hull reflecting the distant starlight in jagged silver streaks. Its weapons were not merely armed, they were alive, thrumming with a low predatory hum that resonated through the Silver Scale's battered sensors. Vorgul had seen warships before. He had fought them, boarded them, destroyed them. This was something else, a flicker of movement on the display. The human vessel's ventral bays were opening, revealing rows of sleek, needle-like craft, boarding pods. But unlike any he had ever seen, they lacked the crude, blunt, forced design of standard assault shuttles. These were precision instruments, their edges honed to a razor's perfection, their engines glowing with the same eerie silver, blue pulse as the Remembrance's main guns. Gromnok's voice was a whisper. "They're launching." Vorgul didn't respond. His gaze was locked on the pods as they detached, their thrusters igniting in perfect unison. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just a single fluid motion, like a predator's first step toward its prey. The pods streaked toward the Silver Scale, their trajectories weaving effortlessly through the debris field. One of them adjusted mid-flight, correcting its angle with a burst of lateral thrust, and Vorgul felt something cold coil in his gut. They're not just flying, they're hunting. The first pod struck the hull near the primary breach point, its impact absorbed by some kind of adaptive dampening system. The outer plating hissed open, and then figures emerged. But not as Vorgul remembered them. Their armor was black as void space, segmented plates shifting fluidly with each movement, their visors glowing the same silver blue as their ship. They moved in perfect silence, weapons already raised, their formation tight, disciplined. No chatter, no wasted motion, just the steady, relentless advance of soldiers who had done this 1,000 times before. One of them turned its head, just slightly, and for a heartbeat, Vorgul swore it was looking directly at him through the ship's external feeds. Then the feed cut to static. Gromnok's spines flared. They're inside. Vorgul exhaled, his claws flexing. He had expected reinforcements. He had expected firepower. This was something far worse. The humans weren't just here to fight. They were here to win, and they had brought the storm with them. The first breach alarm screamed through the Void Claw's corridors like a dying beast. Vorgul's claws dug into the command console, the metal groaning under his grip. The humans had boarded, not through the main airlocks, not through the docking bays, but through the hull itself. Their ship had extended some kind of piercing tendril, a blackened spike that punched through the Void Claws, reinforced plating, as if it were wet clay. No warning, no hesitation, just cold surgical precision. Gromnok's voice crackled over the comms, strained with something Vorgul had never heard from him before. Fear. They're moving too fast. Scanners can't track them. Their armor is scattering our sensors like a burst of static. Then silence. Vorgul snarled, his spines bristling. He had fought pirates, rebels, even rogue war machines from the old empire. But this was different. The humans weren't just attacking, they were hunting. The first Vorthak to die never saw it coming. A shadow detached itself from the darkness of the maintenance corridor, a flicker of movement too fast to register. The soldier, a young warrior named Krell, had barely turned when the human was upon him. Black armor, silver, blue visor, no sound. The blade went through Krell's throat before he could scream. The human didn't stop. It moved past the collapsing body, already scanning, already adjusting its weapon, some kind of compact railgun, humming with barely contained energy, never wavered. Then the lights died. Emergency luminescence flickered on, casting the corridor in a sickly violet haze. The humans didn't slow. If anything, they moved faster in the dark. Vorgul watched the slaughter unfold on the fractured security feeds. The humans moved in perfect, terrifying synchronicity. No wasted shots, no missed strikes. Every movement was calculated, brutal, efficient. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They simply advanced, cutting through his warriors like a blade through flesh. One of them, taller than the others, its armor marked with faint silver sigils, paused at a sealed bulkhead. It didn't bother with the access panel. Instead, it placed a single gauntleted hand against the metal. A pulse of energy. The door exploded inward, shrapnel tearing through the Vorthak defenders on the other side. The human stepped through the smoke, its weapon already tracking the survivors. Vorgul's blood ran cold. This wasn't war. This was execution. Gromnok's voice returned, ragged. They're using our own systems against us. Some kind of adaptive infiltration protocol? They've hacked into the secondary relays? There, a gunshot, a wet gasp, then a new voice, human, female, calm, Vorthak vessel Voidclaw. This is Commander Jennifer Mitchell of the Terran Defense Fleet. You are outmatched. Stand down. Vorgul's claws flexed. Mitchell continued, her tone almost apologetic. You saved one of ours once. A long time ago. We don't forget debts. But we also don't forget threats. The comms cut. Vorgul exhaled. The humans weren't just here to fight. They were here to end this, and they had brought the ghosts of the past with them. The Voidclaw shuddered as another explosion rocked its starboard flank. Vorgul braced himself against the command console, his claws digging into the metal as the deck plates groaned beneath him. The tactical display flickered, its silver-purple holograms distorting under the strain of whatever the humans had unleashed upon them. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The Vorthak Dominion had ruled this sector for centuries. Their warships were monuments of brutal efficiency. Dark steel fortresses wreathed in violet plasma, their weapons capable of reducing lesser species to molten slag in seconds. They had crushed rebellions, broken empires, and enforced their will with the certainty of a predator among prey. This was different. The humans moved like ghosts. Their boarding team struck not with the blunt force of an invading army, but with the precision of surgeons carving through flesh. They didn't just breach bulkheads, they unmade them. The Vorthak's own security protocols turned against them, doors sealing shut at the wrong moments, turrets misfiring into their own ranks, life support systems flickering in and out like dying stars. And then there were the sounds, the screams, the wet, crunching impacts of close-quarters combat. The humans' voices, calm, methodical, utterly devoid of the panic that should have gripped any sane species facing the Dominion's wrath. Vorgul's secondary display flickered to life, showing the feed from engineering, or what was left of it. Gromnak lay sprawled across the deck. His carapace split open by a single brutal wound. A human soldier stood over him, armored in matte, black combat plating that seemed to drink the light around it. The soldier's helmet turned slightly, as if sensing the camera, and for a brief, horrifying moment, Vorgul swore the human looked at him through the feed. Then the transmission cut. Vorgul's spines flattened against his back. This wasn't a battle, it was a hunt, and the Void Claw was the prey. Mitchell's voice crackled through the comms again, this time on the bridge's main channel, just his name, spoken with the quiet certainty of someone who already knew how this would end. You have one chance to surrender. Vorgul's claws flexed. He had faced death before. He had led fleets into battles that should have been unwinnable. He had watched worlds burn beneath the Dominion's guns. This was something else. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to erase the threat, and they had brought everything with them. Mitchell's voice softened, just slightly. You saved one of ours. Once that means something to us. But if you keep fighting, we won't stop until this ship is scrap. Vorgul exhaled. The trap had sprung, and the humans had already won. Section Fey. Echoes of fury. The silence on the Void Claw's bridge was absolute. Vorgul could hear the faint, rhythmic pulse of the ship's silver, purple energy cores, the hum of strained systems, the ragged breathing of his crew. The air smelled of scorched metal and ionized plasma, the scent of a warship pushed to its limits. His claws flexed against the armrests of his command throne, the dark steel groaning under the pressure on the main display. The human fleet hung in the void like a storm-given form. Their ships were angular, brutal things, layered in armor that drank in the Void Claw's scans like a black hole swallowing light. Their weapons, railgun batteries, plasma lances, missile pods, were not merely aimed, they were locked. And at the center of it all, the Iron Resolve, Mitchell's flagship, pulsed with a deep crimson glow along its flanks, like the embers of a fire waiting to be stoked. Gromnak's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the static of damaged comms. They're not just here to fight, they're here to send a message. Vorgul knew. The Dominion had spent decades dismissing humanity as fractured, emotional, weak. They had watched their wars, their petty conflicts, their reckless expansion into the stars. They had seen the scars of their past, the crude weapons, the primitive strategies, and assumed they understood what humans were. They had been wrong because now, as the Iron Resolve's forward batteries cycled to full power, Vorgul saw the truth. This was not a fleet built for conquest, it was a fleet built for vengeance. Mitchell's voice crackled through the bridge again, this time stripped of all pretense. Last chance, Vorgul. The words were not a plea, they were a verdict. Vorgul exhaled, his crest of spines flattening against his skull. His mind raced through the tactical data, the Void Claw's shields flickering at Fey, its engines crippled, its weapons barely operational. Against the human fleet, it was already over. But surrender. The Dominion did not surrender. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Years ago, on the edge of contested space, a single human life pod drifting in the void. A distress signal, weak but persistent. The Void Claw had been on patrol. Its mission clear. Observe, report, engage only if necessary. But Vorgul had given the order to retrieve the pod anyway. No demands, no negotiations, just a single act of mercy. And now, as Mitchell's fleet loomed before him, he realized humans remembered. Gromnock's claws tapped against his console, pulling up the last of the scans. Their weapon systems, they're not just advanced, they're adaptive. The data streamed across the display, lines of violet text flickering in the dim light. The human railguns weren't just firing slugs. They were adjusting trajectory mid-flight, compensating for the Void Claw's evasive maneuvers before they were even made. The plasma lances weren't just cutting through armor. They were learning its weak points, refining their strikes with each successive hit. And then there were the warheads. Gromnock's voice was hollow. They're using singularity cores. Vorgul's blood ran cold. Singularity warheads, weapons that didn't just destroy, but unmade. A single detonation could collapse a ship's hull into a gravitational abyss, leaving nothing but twisted wreckage in its wake. The Dominion had theorized such weapons. The humans had built them. Mitchell's silence stretched, heavy with finality. Vorgul looked at his crew, their spines flattened in fear, their claws gripping consoles, their eyes locked on the display. They were warriors of the Dominion, bred for battle, raised to believe in their own supremacy. But now, faced with the full unfiltered wrath of humanity, they understood. This was not a war they could win. Vorgul reached for the calm. His voice, when it came, was rough with the weight of the moment. "Mitchell, we stand down." The words hung in the air like a detonation waiting to happen. The human fleet's weapons powered down, not in surrender. In acknowledgement, Mitchell's voice, when it came, was softer than before. Wise choice, and for the first time in his life, Vorgul felt something unfamiliar. Not for the Dominion, for the humans. Because they had not come to destroy, they had come to prove a point. And they had. The silence that followed was thicker than the void between stars. Vorgul's claws remained frozen over the console, the silver-purple glow of Dominion instrumentation casting jagged shadows across his armored face. His spines, still half-flattened from the adrenaline of near annihilation, prickled with an unfamiliar sensation. Something between awe and dread. The human fleet hung in space before him, their vessels darkening as weapons cycled down. But the threat they radiated had not diminished. It had merely shifted. Mitchell's voice had been calm. Too calm. That was what unsettled him most. A warrior's rage was predictable. A storm to be weathered, a fire to be smothered. But this was the cold precision of a predator that had already decided it could kill you, and chose, for reasons beyond comprehension, not to behind him. Gromnock exhaled in a shuddering hiss, his violet ocular membranes flickering as he parsed the sensor data. The Dominion's brutalist tactical displays painted the scene in harsh silver-purple schematics, but the reality was worse than the projections. The human ships were not just armed, they were engineered for annihilation. Their hulls bore scars of old wars, carbon-scored plating, patched breaches, the telltale pockmarks of railgun impacts absorbed and endured. These were not fresh-forged vessels of a young species. They were veterans, and their weapons, glistening like the teeth of some leviathan, were not just tools of war. They were promises, Vorgul's, mandibles tightened. He had seen the footage from the human homeworld decades ago. Their primitive cities, their crude fission weapons, their fragile bodies breaking under Dominion artillery. Back then, they had been insects. Now they had built swords out of their own bones. A flicker on the tactical holo drew his gaze. One of the human ships, a monstrous dreadnought, its angular prow carved like the blade of an axe, was adjusting position. Not aggressively, almost. Deliberately. Gromnock saw it too. His spines twitched. "They're not leaving," he murmured. Vorgul didn't answer. He didn't need to. The humans weren't withdrawing. They were waiting. Mitchell's last words echoed in his skull. Wise choice, not praise. A reminder that this ceasefire was not surrender. It was mercy. And mercy, Vorgul realized with a cold ripple down his spine, was the most terrifying weapon of all, because it meant the humans could have killed them, and chose not to. Section Fey. Borrowed time. The silence on the Storm's Edge bridge was thick enough to choke on. Vorgul stood motionless before the tactical hollow, his claws flexing against the command console. The human fleet hung in the void, like a storm front, dark, bristling, impossibly still. Their ships were not the sleek, elegant designs of the Dominion, nor the brutalist slabs of the Vorthak war clans. They were something else entirely, angular, jagged. Every line spoke of violence restrained, of fury sheathed in cold precision. Gromnock's talons clicked against his datapad, the sound too loud in the quiet. His spines were half flattened, a subconscious display of unease. The readings didn't make sense. They should have fired. That was the unspoken truth humming through the bridge. The humans had every advantage. Their weapons outranged Vorthak defenses by a staggering margin. Their armor absorbed plasma bursts like rain on stone. And yet, they waited. Mitchell's face still lingered on the comm screen, frozen in that last moment before the transmission cut. Her expression hadn't been smug, not even victorious. Just calm, like she had already seen the end of this story, and it bored her. Vorgul's mandibles tightened, a chime from the sensor array. His head snapped toward it, one of the human dreadnoughts. The Acheron, its name etched in jagged script across its prow, was powering its engines, not to attack, not to flee. A slow, deliberate burn, adjusting its position, just enough to bring its main batteries to bear on the Storm's Edge. Gromnock hissed through his teeth. "They're toying with us." Vorgul didn't answer. His eyes traced the flickering signatures on the hollow, the way the human ships moved in perfect, silent unison. No chatter, no wasted energy, just the quiet certainty of predators who knew their prey couldn't run. And then the realization hit him, cold and sharp as a blade between the ribs. They're not just waiting, they're remembering. Decades ago, during the first expansion war, a single Vorthak cruiser had stumbled upon a crippled human vessel drifting near the edge of a dead system. A scout ship, barely spaceworthy, its crew half, dead from radiation burns. Standard protocol demanded its destruction. But the cruiser's commander had hesitated. And then, against all reason, he had ordered the humans brought aboard. Medical attention, repairs, no demands, no negotiations, just an act of mercy, a debt unpaid. Vorgul's claws dug into the console. The Dominion had laughed when they heard, called it weakness. The Vorthak High Command had disavowed the action, scrubbed it from records. But humans remembered, and now, as the Acheron's guns hummed to full power, Vorgul understood. This wasn't just a battle, it was a reckoning. Mitchell's voice echoed in his skull. Wise choice, not praise. The humans could have erased them from the stars. Instead, they had offered a ceasefire, not because they feared the Vorthak, but because someone, long ago, had shown them kindness. And now, as the Storm's Edge hung in the killing field of a dozen human warships, Vorgul felt the weight of that debt settle over him like a shroud. Mercy, he realized, was the most terrifying weapon of all, because it meant the humans chose to let them live, and choices, unlike debts, could be unmade. Section Fey. The Gambit, the Storm's Edge, hung suspended in the void, its silver-purple hull flickering under the cold gaze of human warships. Vorgul's claws flexed against the command console, the alloy groaning under the pressure. His spines lay flat against his back, a primal response to the sheer presence of the human fleet. They had not fired. That was the most unnerving part. The Acheron loomed ahead, its blackened armor drinking in the starlight, its weapons humming at the edge of activation. A dozen more ships flanked it, each a silent predator, each capable of reducing the Storm's Edge to molten slag in seconds. And yet, they waited. Gromnock's voice crackled over the comm, strained with disbelief. "They're hailing us again. Vorgul exhaled through his nasal vents, the sound ragged. The humans had already transmitted their terms: a ceasefire, an alliance, a partnership. It was insanity. The Dominion had burned their worlds, hunted their people, laughed as they crushed human colonies beneath their war machines. And now the humans offered mercy. Vorgul's mind raced. The humans were not naive. They did not forgive. They remembered every slight, every atrocity, every life lost. They carried it all in their blood. So why spare the Vorthak now? The answer slithered into his thoughts like a blade between the ribs. Because we spared one of theirs, a single act, decades old. A wounded human pilot drifting in the wreckage of a skirmish the Vorthak had no stake in. Gromnok, then a junior medic, had ordered the retrieval. No orders, no strategy, just compassion. The Dominion had mocked them for it. Now that same compassion was the only thing keeping them alive. On the view screen, the Acheron's forward batteries pulsed. Once, twice, a silent reminder of their power. Vorgul's secondary heart pounded. He had faced death before. But this was worse. This was hope. A chime sounded. The human commander's face filled the screen. Mitchell, her dark eyes sharp, her expression unreadable. Your answer, Commander, not a question, a demand. Vorgul's claws twitched. To refuse meant annihilation. To accept meant betraying the Dominion. A flicker on the scanners, Gromnok's voice, sharp with alarm. Incoming jump signatures. Dominion warships, bearing down on the human flank. Vorgul's blood ran cold. The Dominion had followed them, had used them as bait. Mitchell's eyes narrowed, she knew, and now the choice was no longer his. The humans would fight. The only question was, would they die with the Vorthak, or because of them? The Dominion warships tore into real space like blades through flesh, silver purple hulls, glinting with the cold sheen of gunmetal. Their brutalist architecture bristling with weapon nodes, already pulsing with violet energy. 6 of them. No, 8, then 12. The void itself seemed to recoil from their arrival, the distortion waves of their jump drives rippling outward like shock waves through water. Vorgul's claws dug into the command console, the alloy groaning under the pressure. His secondary heart hammered against his ribs, a drumbeat of dread. A trap the Dominion had known, had let them flee, let them run straight into the humans, only to spring the jaws shut behind them. Gromnok's voice was raw. Shields at Fey engines still crippled. We cannot outrun them. Vorgul didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the view screen, on the human warship Acheron. Its blackened hull now turning, its massive railgun arrays cycling up with a hum that vibrated through the comms like a predator's growl. Mitchell hadn't severed the transmission. Her face was still there, still watching. But something had shifted in her expression. The cold calculation was gone. In its place, recognition. And something worse. 27 years ago, the human colony ship Odyssey had been a drifting wreck when the Vorthak salvage cruiser Kethari found it. Life support failing, engines dead, a single distress beacon flickering on the edge of oblivion. Standard procedure was to ignore it. The Dominion did not waste resources on lesser species. But Vorgul had been young then, a junior officer not yet hardened by war, and the scans had shown something impossible, a survivor. A single human child, sealed in a failing cryopod, her vitals flickering toward extinction. He had given the order to retrieve her. No demands, no bargaining. Just the quiet, unthinking act of a soldier who had not yet learned the galaxy's cruelty. They had left her at the nearest neutral outpost, had never even learned her name. Mitchell's lips parted, not in a snarl, not in a curse. In a whisper, the word was a blade. Vorgul's spine stiffened. He had not made the connection, could not have. That wasted child, that forgotten moment of mercy, was nothing to the tides of war. But humans remembered. They carried their debts. Mitchell turned her head slightly, barking an order to someone off screen. Then, her gaze locked back onto Vorgul. Hold position. The transmission cut. The Acheron's engines flared, not toward escape, but toward the oncoming Dominion fleet. Toward war, Gromnak hissed. They're engaging, alone. They'll be torn apart. Vorgul watched the human ship accelerate, its weapon ports blazing to life, because somewhere in the dark, in the hollow silence between stars, a debt had been called. And humanity had answered. The Acheron burned through the void, its engines a silent scream of defiance against the dark. The Dominion fleet loomed ahead, a wall of silver, purple brutality, their warships bristling with weaponry that had crushed entire civilizations. Vorgul's claws flexed against the command console, his spines rigid. He had seen this before, the desperate charge, the futile last stand. The Dominion did not take prisoners. They did not accept surrender. They erased. Yet the human ship did not slow. Gromnak's frills flared in agitation, his voice a low hiss. They cannot win. Not like this. Vorgul said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, watching as the Acheron's trajectory carved a solitary line toward annihilation. A distortion in the void. At first, it was nothing more than a ripple in the sensor grid, a ghost of interference. Then another, and another. Gromnak's claws spasmed over the console, his voice sharp. What? Space shivered. One moment, there was nothing. The next, ships tore into reality with the violence of a blade through flesh. Human ships, not one. They came in waves, cruisers, destroyers, carriers. Their hulls scarred from battles fought in distant systems, their engines still burning from hard jumps. Some bore the fresh wounds of recent combat, armor scorched and patched in haste. Others were older, their designs archaic by Dominion standards, yet no less lethal for it. And at their head, a monstrous dreadnought, its prow carved into the snarling visage of a wolf. Vorgul's breath caught. The Dominion fleet hesitated. For the first time in living memory, the unstoppable war machine paused. Mitchell's voice crackled over the comms, not to Vorgul, but to the newly arrived fleet. Took you long enough. A dry chuckle answered her. Traffic was hell. Then the dreadnought's guns roared. Plasma lances split the dark, carving through Dominion shields like fire through paper. Railgun salvos followed, their projectiles moving at relativistic speeds, punching through hulls with contemptuous ease. The human ships moved with a terrifying synchronicity, their formations tight, their fire disciplined. This was not the reckless charge of a dying species. This was a hunt. Gromnak's frills flattened against his skull. They knew, they were waiting. Vorgul's throat tightened. Of course they had known. The Acheron had not been running. It had been bait, and the Dominion had taken it. Mitchell's face reappeared on the view screen, her expression unreadable. Vorgul, his name, not his title. You saved one of ours. Now we save all of yours. The transmission cut. The battle raged, and for the first time in centuries, the Vorthak collective hoped. The void burned silver and violet, a storm of plasma and railgun fire etching scars across the black. The Dominion fleet, once an unstoppable tide of conquest, now writhed in the jaws of a predator they had never seen coming. Vorgul watched from the bridge of the Acheron, his frills trembling with something he had long forgotten. Awe. The human warships moved like a single organism, their formations fluid yet precise, their weapons carving through Dominion hulls with surgical brutality. Shields collapsed under coordinated barrages, dreadnoughts ruptured like overripe fruit, and the once proud Dominion vanguard dissolved into a graveyard of molten wreckage. Gromnak's claws dug into the console beside him, his voice a whisper. They were waiting. All this time, they were waiting. Vorgul exhaled, his breath ragged. Of course they had been. The Acheron had limped into human space, bleeding and broken, and the Dominion had followed, blind with arrogance. They had expected prey. Instead, they found wolves. On the view screen, the human flagship, indomitable, its hull scorched but unbroken, pivoted with terrifying grace, its railgun batteries cycling for another volley. The Dominion's last surviving command ship tried to flee, its engines flaring in desperation. It never made it. A single shot, a streak of hypersonic tungsten punched through its core. The vessel detonated in a silent blossom of fire, its death throes illuminating the battlefield in stark, flickering light. Then, silence. The Dominion fleet was gone. Mitchell's voice crackled over the calm measured. Vorgul's status, his throat tightened. He had expected triumph in her tone, gloating. The smug satisfaction of a predator victorious, but there was none. Just the same quiet certainty that had marked every human action since their arrival. We, his voice faltered. We are alive. A pause. Then softer, good. The transmission ended. Gromnock turned to him, his frills twitching. They could have let us die. They owed us nothing. Vorgul stared at the wreckage drifting between the stars. They had owed them everything. Decades ago, a single Vorthak frigate had spared a human life. A mercy, small and fleeting, given without thought of repayment. And yet, humanity had remembered. And now, they had returned the debt in fire and steel. Mitchell's face appeared once more on the view screen, her gaze steady. The Dominion won't stop. They'll come again. Vorgul straightened, his spines rising. Then we fight. For the first time in centuries, the words did not taste like despair. Mitchell nodded, and the stars burned silver behind her. Section continuation. The silence that followed was not the quiet of defeat, but the stillness before a storm. Vorgul watched as the human fleet, smaller than the Dominion's armada, yet impossibly dense with purpose, repositioned itself. Their ships moved with an efficiency that bordered on instinct, as if each vessel were an extension of a single will. The wreckage of the Dominion's vanguard still glowed in the void, twisted metal and cooling plasma drifting like funeral offerings. Gromnock exhaled sharply, his claws flexing against the command console. They will not forgive this. Vorgul knew he did not mean the humans. The Dominion had ruled through fear for millennia. Their fleets had crushed rebellions before they could spark. Their weapons had turned worlds to glass for defiance, as slight as a delayed tribute. And now, here, against a species they had dismissed as weak, they had been broken, not just defeated, humiliated. Mitchell's voice crackled over the calm once more, calm and unyielding. We've bought time. Not much. They'll regroup. Vorgul's spines twitched. He had seen the Dominion's wrath before. They would return with more ships, more weapons, more fury. They would burn entire systems to erase the insult of this loss. The human fleet did not flee. They held position, their engines idling, their weapons still humming with readiness, as if they expected the storm, as if they welcomed it. Gromnock hissed. They cannot win a war of attrition. The Dominion has thousands of ships. Vorgul looked at the tactical display, at the human vessels, their hulls scarred but unbroken, at the wreckage of the Dominion's pride strewn across the void. No, he said softly, but they can make it cost more than the Dominion is willing to pay. Mitchell's face was a study in grim resolve. Then let's make sure they remember the price. The stars watched, cold and indifferent, as the two fleets, alien and human, prepared for what came next. And for the first time in living memory, the Vorthak did not feel alone.